The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting soft golden rays over Willow Creek Market. It was one of those quiet afternoons where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just another day at a neighborhood grocery store tucked away in a bustling suburban area. Shoppers moved through the aisles with their carts, picking up bread, milk, and snacks for the week. The hum of conversation blended with the occasional beep of the cash registers, creating a comforting rhythm that Linda Harper knew well. Linda had been managing Willow Creek Market for nearly 5 years. She took pride in keeping everything running smoothly, from making sure shelves were stocked to ensuring customers felt safe while they shopped. Her employees respected her, and most regulars greeted her by name as they passed by. But today, something, or rather someone, caught her attention in a way she didn't expect. Near the snack aisle stood a teenage boy wearing a dark hoodie and headphones. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, and he seemed lost in thought as he scanned the rows of chips and candy bars. Linda paused for a moment, watching him. He looked like any other kid you might see in the store, but something about him made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way his hood partially covered his face, or maybe it was how casually he glanced around the aisle. Whatever it was, it planted a seed of suspicion in her mind. She told herself she wasn't jumping to conclusions. After all, she'd seen plenty of teenagers come through these doors, some more polite than others. But this one, there was just something different. Or so she thought. Linda shook her head slightly, trying to push away the nagging feeling. Still, she couldn't help but keep an eye on him as she went about her tasks. As the minutes ticked by, the boy, Marcus, moved slowly down the aisle, stopping now and then to pick up an item only to put it back moments later. He eventually wandered toward the electronics section, lingering near the display of chargers and earbuds. Linda's unease grew stronger. Why was he taking so long? Was he really interested in buying something, or was he casing the place? These questions swirled in her mind, fueled by years of stereotypes she hadn't even realized she carried. Linda tried to rationalize her thoughts. Maybe he was just indecisive. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But the longer she watched, the more convinced she became that something wasn't right. Her heart began to race as doubt clouded her judgment. Finally, unable to shake off her suspicions, she decided to act. Picking up her phone, she dialed the local police department. With a shaky voice, she reported a potential shoplifter matching Marcus's description. What Linda didn't know, and couldn't have guessed, was that Marcus wasn't planning anything wrong at all. In fact, he was having a perfectly normal day. Earlier that morning, he promised his mom he'd stop by the store to grab a few things for her birthday. Now he was debating whether to get her a new phone charger or save up for something bigger. Completely unaware of the storm brewing behind him, Marcus continued browsing, oblivious to the chain of events about to unfold. As Marcus stood in the electronics aisle, his mind was far from mischief. He held a phone charger in one hand, turning it over to check the price tag. His mom's birthday was only a few days away, and he wanted to make sure whatever he bought would be useful but not too expensive. Money was tight at home, so every dollar counted. He glanced at the sleek design of the charger again, wondering if it would last longer than the cheap ones they usually got. Unbeknownst to him, Linda Harper had already decided he wasn't just another customer. From her vantage point near the checkout counters, she kept stealing glances at Marcus. Every movement he made seemed suspicious to her, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the occasional glance toward the security cameras, even the fact that his hoodie partially covered his face. None of these things were unusual on their own, but together they painted a picture in Linda's mind that she couldn't ignore. Linda tried to convince herself she wasn't being unfair. She reminded herself of past incidents at the store, times when shoplifters had been caught red-handed after acting strangely. But deep down, she knew something else was driving her suspicion. It wasn't just about what Marcus was doing, it was also about who he was. The color of his skin, the clothes he wore, the music faintly audible through his headphones. All of it triggered unconscious biases she didn't fully understand. Without realizing it, She was letting fear and prejudice guide her actions instead of facts. Her unease reached its peak when Marcus lingered near the electronics display for several minutes without making a purchase. To Linda, this felt like confirmation of her worst fears. "He's stalling," she muttered under her breath, clutching her phone tightly. Her heart pounded as she wrestled with what to do next. Should she confront him directly? Call security? Or maybe call the police? Each option felt heavy, but the idea of doing nothing scared her even more. Finally, unable to shake off her growing anxiety, Linda picked up her phone and dialed the local police department. Her voice trembled as she described the situation. A young black teenager wearing a hoodie, behaving suspiciously in the electronics section. She avoided using words like black or hoodie explicitly, but her tone said enough. Within minutes, she hung up, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. Relief because help was on the way, and guilt because part of her wondered if she'd overreacted. Meanwhile, Marcus remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. After deciding against the charger, he thought he could find a better deal online. He moved toward the greeting card section. His mom loved heartfelt notes, and he figured pairing a card with whatever gift he eventually chose would make her smile. As he flipped through the colorful cards, reading cheesy jokes and heartfelt messages, he chuckled softly to himself. Life might have been tough lately, but moments like these reminded him of the little joys that mattered most. Back at the front of the store, Linda paced nervously. What if she was wrong? What if the boy was innocent and she'd caused unnecessary trouble? She pushed those thoughts aside, telling herself she was simply following protocol. Still, a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered that she might regret this decision later. Little did she know how true that voice would turn out to be. The sound of sirens pierced the calm afternoon air, growing louder as two police cars pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Market. Shoppers paused mid-step, their curiosity piqued by the unexpected arrival. Some craned their necks to see what was happening, while others exchanged whispers, wondering if someone had been hurt or if there was a robbery in progress. No one could have guessed that the center of attention would soon be Marcus, the quiet teenager still browsing through greeting cards near the front of the store. Moments later, two officers entered the store, their uniforms crisp and authoritative. They scanned the area quickly before spotting Marcus exactly where Linda had described, standing alone, flipping through a rack of cards. One of the officers approached him with measured steps, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. The other hung back slightly, keeping an eye on the surrounding crowd. "Excuse me, son," the first officer said firmly, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the store. "Can we talk to you for a moment?" Marcus froze, the card he'd been holding slipping from his fingers and fluttering to the floor. He turned slowly, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone cautious but calm. "Did I do something wrong?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured for Marcus to step aside, away from the other shoppers. "We just need to ask you a few questions," he said, though his tone suggested it wasn't a request. Marcus hesitated, glancing around at the growing number of eyes now fixed on him. Reluctantly, he followed the officer to a quieter corner of the store, his heart beginning to race. Linda watched from behind the counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She told herself this was the right thing to do, that she was protecting her store and her customers. But as she saw the look of bewilderment on Marcus's face, doubt crept in once again. Was this really necessary? Had she made a terrible mistake? The officers wasted no time getting down to business. "Do you have a receipt for anything you're carrying?" one of them asked, his gaze steady and unyielding. Marcus blinked, taken aback by the question. "I haven't bought anything yet," he replied honestly. "I'm still looking." Unsatisfied, the officers pressed further. "Mind if we take a look inside your bag?" one of them asked, nodding toward the small backpack slung over Marcus's shoulder. Marcus hesitated, feeling a mix of frustration and humiliation. Why were they treating him like a criminal when he hadn't done anything wrong? Still, knowing resistance would only make things worse, he reluctantly handed over his bag. As the officers rummaged through its contents, a water bottle, a notebook, and a few pens, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Not a single item from the store was inside. Yet, instead of apologizing or letting him go, they continued questioning him, asking why he'd been lingering in certain areas and whether he had any plans to steal. Each question felt like a weight pressing down on Marcus, making it harder to breathe. By now, a small crowd had gathered, some watching silently while others filmed the scene on their phones. Whispers rippled through the store. What's going on? Is that kid in trouble? Why are they searching his bag? A few people looked sympathetic, shaking their heads at the sight of a young boy being treated like a suspect. Others seemed indifferent, assuming there must be a good reason for the police presence. For Marcus, the situation felt surreal. Just moments ago, he'd been thinking about which birthday card would make his mom laugh. Now he was standing under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers who judged him based on appearances alone. He tried to stay composed, answering each question as politely as possible, but inside, anger and embarrassment simmered. How could this be happening? What had he done to deserve this? Linda, meanwhile, stood frozen behind the counter, her earlier confidence crumbling. As she watched the officers search Marcus's belongings and interrogate him, guilt gnawed at her conscience. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She'd imagined a quick resolution, a simple check to ease her worries, but now she realized she might have caused far more harm than she'd intended. Just as the tension in the store reached its peak, the sound of a car door slamming outside drew everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV had pulled up to the curb, its polished surface gleaming under the afternoon sun. For a moment, no one paid much attention. After all, customers came and went from the parking lot all the time. But when the driver's door opened and a tall, distinguished man stepped out, heads turned almost instantly. The man moved with purpose, his tailored suit crisp and his posture commanding. He wore an expression that was calm but firm, exuding authority with every step. As he strode toward the entrance of Willow Creek Market, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some recognized him immediately. Others didn't, but they could sense that this wasn't just another bystander showing up to gawk at the commotion. This was someone important. Linda Harper felt her stomach drop the second she saw him. She'd seen his face countless times before, in newspapers, on local news broadcasts, even on campaign posters around town. It was Mayor Daniel Johnson, a well-respected figure known for his advocacy work and progressive policies. And as he approached the scene unfolding inside the store, Linda realized something far worse. Marcus, the teenager being questioned by the officers, bore a striking resemblance to the mayor. Mayor Johnson wasted no time. Ignoring the stares of onlookers, he walked straight to where Marcus stood, flanked by the two officers. His eyes locked onto his son's face, taking in the mix of frustration and embarrassment etched there. Then, without hesitation, he turned to the officers. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with quiet intensity. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by the sudden arrival of such a high-profile figure. "Sir, we received a report about suspicious behavior," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward Marcus. "We're just trying to get some clarification." "Suspicious behavior," Mayor Johnson repeated, his tone sharpening slightly. "My son is 15 years old. He came here to buy a gift for his mother's birthday. Are you telling me that browsing in a store now qualifies as suspicious?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner for support. Neither of them seemed prepared for this confrontation. Meanwhile, Marcus finally spoke up, his voice trembling with emotion. "Dad, they searched my bag. They thought I was stealing something, but I haven't done anything wrong." Mayor Johnson placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder, squeezing gently. Then, turning back to the officers, he asked pointedly, "Who called you? who reported this so-called suspicious behavior. All eyes turned to Linda, who was still standing behind the counter. Her face flushed red as she became the unwilling focus of everyone's attention. The mayor's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, she felt as though she were shrinking under its weight. Summoning what little courage she had left, she stammered, I'm the manager. I called because I thought." "You thought what?" Mayor Johnson interrupted, his voice cutting through her faltering explanation like a knife. "That my son looked like someone who might steal. That his hoodie or the color of his skin made him guilty until proven innocent." Linda opened her mouth to respond but found herself at a loss for words. Tears welled up in her eyes as shame washed over her. She wanted to explain, to say that she hadn't meant to cause harm, that she was only doing her job, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood there, frozen, as the full weight of her actions settled over her. The crowd, which had grown larger with each passing minute, watched the exchange in stunned silence. Phones continued to record, capturing every word and gesture. Social media would soon be flooded with videos and commentary. But for now, the atmosphere in the store was electric, charged with a mix of anger, disbelief, and anticipation. Mayor Johnson didn't raise his voice or make threats. Instead, he maintained his composure, speaking with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "This isn't just about my son," he said, addressing not only the officers but also the growing audience. "It's about how we treat people based on assumptions and biases. It's about recognizing when those biases lead to injustice, and it's about holding ourselves accountable when we get it wrong." As he spoke, Marcus stood silently beside him, his head bowed. Though relieved to have his father by his side, he couldn't shake the sting of humiliation. He'd been singled out, judged, and treated like a criminal, all because of the way he looked. For the first time, he truly understood the weight of prejudice, and it left him feeling both angry and powerless. Linda, meanwhile, felt as though the ground beneath her feet had crumbled away. In that, the confrontation between Mayor Johnson and Linda Harper didn't end with accusations or raised voices. Instead, it shifted into a quieter but equally intense moment of reckoning. After his pointed remarks about bias and accountability, the mayor turned his full attention to Linda, who still stood frozen behind the counter. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the register for support. The weight of what she'd done, and the public exposure of it, was crushing her. "Tell me," Mayor Johnson began, his tone softer now, but no less firm. "Why did you call the police on my son? What exactly made you think he was a threat?" Linda swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. She glanced at Marcus, who was standing silently beside his father, then back at the growing crowd of onlookers. Every pair of eyes in the store seemed to be fixed on her, waiting for an explanation that wouldn't come easily. Finally, she managed to choke out, I thought he looked suspicious. He was just standing there, looking around, and I got nervous." "Nervous?" the mayor repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Because he's black, because he wore a hoodie, or because you decided ahead of time that he didn't belong here?" His questions hit like hammer blows, each one forcing Linda to confront the uncomfortable truth. She wanted to defend herself, to say that she wasn't racist, that she hadn't meant to hurt anyone, but deep down, she knew better. The stereotypes she'd absorbed over years had shaped her perception without her even realizing it. Now they were laid bare for everyone to see. Tears spilled down Linda's cheeks as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause this. I really didn't." Her voice cracked under the pressure, and for a moment, the entire store fell silent. Even the officers, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, seemed unsure of how to proceed. Mayor Johnson studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, exhaling deeply, he said, "An apology is a start, but it's not enough. Words won't undo what happened here today. What matters now is what you do next." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "It's not just about me," he said, addressing both Linda and the crowd. "This happens to people like me all the time. We get followed in stores, accused of things we didn't do, treated like criminals because of how we look. It's exhausting, and it has to stop." His words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from some in the audience. Others simply nodded, their expressions thoughtful. For many, this was the first time they'd witnessed such an incident up close, and it forced them to consider the broader implications of racial profiling, not just in stores but in society as a whole. Linda, overwhelmed by guilt and shame, could only nod weakly. "I'll do better," she promised, her voice barely above a whisper. "I swear I will." Mayor Johnson gave her a long, measured look before responding. "You need to understand something," he said. "This isn't just about you feeling bad or making amends. This is about recognizing your role in perpetuating a system that harms innocent people every single day. If you truly want to change, you have to educate yourself. You have to challenge the biases you carry. And most importantly, you have to take action, not just for yourself, but for others." The gravity of his words hung in the air, leaving Linda visibly shaken. For the first time in her life, she realized the ripple effect of her actions. What had started as a snap judgment based on fear had spiraled into a public spectacle that exposed deep-seated issues within her community. As much as she wished she could turn back time, she knew she couldn't erase what had happened. All she could do was move forward and try to make things right. As the tension in the store began to ease, the officers quietly concluded their investigation, finding no evidence to justify detaining Marcus further. With a final nod to Mayor Johnson, they left the scene, their presence no longer needed. Meanwhile, the crowd slowly dispersed, though conversations continued to buzz among shoppers. Some expressed outrage over what they'd witnessed. Others admitted they'd never considered how prejudice played out in everyday situations. For Linda, the hardest part was yet to come. The cameras might leave, and the crowd might disperse, but the memory of this day would stay with her forever. It was a lesson she couldn't afford to forget, and one she would have to work tirelessly to learn from if she hoped to rebuild trust, not only with Marcus and his family, but with the wider community she served. By the time the officers left and the crowd began to thin, news of the incident had already spread far beyond the walls of Willow Creek Market. Videos captured by shoppers were uploaded to social media within minutes, sparking outrage across platforms. Hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #EndRacial Profiling started trending locally, then nationally. People shared their own stories of being unfairly targeted because of their race, turning Marcus's experience into a rallying cry for change. Local news outlets quickly picked up the story, airing clips of the confrontation along with interviews from witnesses who had been in the store that day. One shopper described how the poor kid didn't deserve any of this, while another called out the blatant prejudice behind Linda's actions. The coverage painted her as an example of systemic bias, a symbol of how deeply rooted stereotypes could lead to real-world harm. As the backlash grew, so did the pressure on Willow Creek Market. Calls for boycotts flooded in, with many vowing never to shop there again until meaningful action was taken. Protesters gathered outside the store the very next morning, holding signs that read "Stop Racial Profiling" and "Black Lives Matter." Their chants echoed through the parking lot, drawing even more attention to the controversy. For a business that prided itself on serving the community, it was a devastating blow. Linda, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't anticipated. Overnight, her name became synonymous with discrimination, and the weight of public scrutiny bore down on her relentlessly. She couldn't sleep, haunted by images of Marcus's hurt expression and the sound of Mayor Johnson's piercing questions. Each notification on her phone brought another wave of criticism or condemnation, leaving her feeling isolated and ashamed. Her employer, eager to distance themselves from the fallout, launched an internal investigation into her conduct. They warned her that termination was a possibility if she failed to address her behavior and demonstrate genuine remorse. But beyond losing her job, Linda feared something worse. becoming a cautionary tale, someone forever remembered for perpetuating injustice rather than fighting against it. Determined to make amends, Linda reached out to Mayor Johnson directly, requesting a private meeting with him and Marcus. It wasn't easy. Her initial attempts were met with hesitation, but eventually they agreed to sit down together. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe a few days later, away from cameras and reporters. Linda arrived early, her hands shaking as she rehearsed what she wanted to say. When Marcus and his father walked in, Linda stood up immediately, tears already welling in her eyes. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you both to know how sorry I am. I let my fears and biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt your son and your family in ways I'll regret for the rest of my life." Marcus listened quietly, his arms crossed over his chest. Though he appreciated her apology, he wasn't ready to forgive just yet. "It's not enough to say sorry," he told her, his tone firm but calm. "You need to prove that you mean it. Words don't fix anything unless you back them up with action." Mayor Johnson nodded in agreement. "My son is right," he said. "Apologies are important, but they're only the first step. What we need now is accountability, not just from you, but from everyone who allows these systems of bias to exist. You have a choice. You can either use this moment to grow and create change, or you can let it define you in all the wrong ways." Linda nodded fervently, taking their words to heart. Over the course of the meeting, she asked thoughtful questions about how she could educate herself and become part of the solution. She promised to enroll in diversity training programs, attend workshops on racial equity, and advocate for policy changes within her company. Most importantly, she vowed to speak up whenever she saw unfair treatment happening around her. Though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Linda left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since the incident, she felt a glimmer of hope, not for redemption, but for growth. She knew she couldn't erase the pain she'd caused, but she could dedicate herself to ensuring that no one else had to endure what Marcus had gone through. And in doing so, she hoped to turn a moment of shame into an opportunity for lasting change. In the weeks that followed, Linda Harper threw herself into the work of self-improvement and advocacy with a determination that surprised even herself. She began attending diversity training sessions hosted by local organizations, sitting quietly in the back of the room at first, unsure of what to say or how to contribute. But as she listened to stories from people who had faced discrimination, stories far more harrowing than Marcus's, she started to see the world through their eyes. Each session chipped away at the biases she hadn't realized she carried, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and society. Beyond the workshops, Linda took it upon herself to educate others within Willow Creek Market. She proposed mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of their appearance. At first, her suggestion was met with resistance. Some coworkers dismissed it as unnecessary, while others worried it would create tension among staff. But Linda persisted, sharing her own experience and explaining why change was so crucial, not just for the store's reputation, but for its role in the community. Her efforts didn't stop there. Inspired by Mayor Johnson's challenge to take action, Linda partnered with local activists to host a series of public discussions on racial profiling and systemic bias. These events brought together residents, business owners, and community leaders to talk openly about the challenges faced by marginalized groups. For many attendees, it was the first time they'd heard these issues discussed so candidly, and the conversations often grew emotional. Some shared personal stories of being unfairly targeted, while others admitted they hadn't fully understood the depth of the problem until now. Slowly but surely, Linda began to rebuild trust, not just with Marcus and his family, but with the broader community. She made a point of engaging with customers more intentionally, greeting them warmly, and asking how she could improve their shopping experience. When complaints arose, she handled them with patience and empathy, ensuring that no one felt dismissed or judged. Over time, Shoppers noticed the shift in her demeanor, and while not everyone forgave her immediately, many appreciated the effort she was making. For Marcus, watching Linda's transformation was bittersweet. On one hand, he was glad to see her taking steps toward accountability. On the other, he couldn't forget the humiliation he'd endured that day in the store. Still, he recognized that true change takes time, and he decided to give her credit for trying. When she invited him and his father to speak at one of the community events, Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to share his story and inspire others to stand up against injustice. The event drew a large crowd, filling the auditorium with a mix of curious faces and supportive allies. As Marcus stepped onto the stage alongside his father, he felt a surge of nerves, but also pride. Speaking into the microphone, he recounted the details of that fateful afternoon, describing how it felt to be accused of something he hadn't done simply because of how he looked. His words were raw and honest, resonating deeply with those in attendance. "I'm not special," Marcus said, pausing to let his statement sink in. "What happened to me happens to black kids everywhere, every single day. We're told we don't belong, that we're suspicious, that we're less than human. And until we start addressing the root causes of these attitudes, nothing will change." His speech earned a standing ovation, with many audience members moved to tears. Afterward, several people approached him and his father to express gratitude for shedding light on such an important issue. Even Linda, who sat quietly in the front row during the talk, approached them afterward to thank Marcus personally. "Your courage inspires me," she told him sincerely. "I promise I'll keep working to make things better, for you, for your family, and for everyone." Though scars remained from that painful day, the incident ultimately sparked meaningful dialogue and action. People who had once turned a blind eye to racial profiling began paying closer attention, calling out injustices when they saw them. Businesses like Willow Creek Market implemented new policies aimed at fostering inclusivity and respect. And Linda, once defined by her mistake, became an advocate for change, a living reminder that growth is possible, even after failure. As the community came together to heal and learn, Marcus found solace in knowing that his experience hadn't been in vain. It had ignited a movement, however small, toward greater understanding and equality. And for that, he allowed himself to feel a sense of hope. Months after the incident at Willow Creek Market, the community came together for a special event, a day dedicated to celebrating inclusivity, unity, and progress. The parking lot was transformed into a vibrant festival space, filled with colorful banners, food trucks, and booths hosted by local organizations. Families gathered under the warm afternoon sun, laughing, sharing stories, and learning from one another. It was a far cry from the tension and division that had gripped the neighborhood just months before. Mayor Daniel Johnson stood on a small stage at the center of the festivities, his presence commanding yet approachable. As he stepped up to the microphone, the chatter of the crowd quieted, and all eyes turned to him. He began by acknowledging the pain and frustration that had surfaced in the wake of the incident involving his son, Marcus. What happened wasn't just about one person or one store, he said, his voice steady but heartfelt. It was a reflection of deeper issues we've ignored for too long, issues of bias, fear, and inequality. He went on to praise the steps taken by individuals and businesses to address those issues, highlighting Linda Harper's efforts as an example of how accountability could lead to growth. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he reminded the audience. "But when we choose to listen, learn, and act, we create opportunities for healing, not just for ourselves, but for our entire community." Standing beside him was Marcus, who had grown more confident in using his voice over the past few months. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped forward, gripping the sides of the podium tightly. His words were simple but powerful. "I didn't ask to be part of this story," he admitted, looking out at the sea of faces. "But if my experience can help even one person understand what it feels like to be judged unfairly, then maybe something good came out of it." His honesty struck a chord with the crowd, earning applause and cheers. Many attendees nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears as they reflected on their own roles in fostering, or challenging, the biases that existed around them. For Marcus, standing there in front of so many people felt surreal. He had gone from being a teenager unfairly accused to becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. While the journey hadn't been easy, he knew it was worth it. Linda also attended the event, though she kept a low profile, helping behind the scenes rather than taking the spotlight. She worked alongside volunteers, setting up tables, handing out flyers, and engaging in conversations with anyone willing to talk. Her transformation was evident in the way she carried herself, with humility and purpose. Though she still carried the weight of her mistake, she found solace in knowing she was actively contributing to a better future. One particularly poignant moment occurred when a young girl approached Linda during the event. Clutching a coloring book themed around diversity and inclusion, the child looked up at her and asked, "Are you the lady who learned to be kinder?" Linda smiled softly, kneeling down to meet the girl's gaze. "Yes," she replied, "and I'm still learning every day." The exchange was small but meaningful, a reminder that actions, even imperfect ones, could inspire others. By the end of the day, dozens of attendees shared similar moments, leaving the event with renewed determination to challenge prejudice wherever they encountered it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Mayor Johnson closed the celebration with a final message. "Today is proof that we are stronger together. Let us carry this spirit forward, not just today, but every day." The crowd erupted into applause, united in their commitment to building a fairer, more compassionate world. For Marcus, the event marked a turning point. He no longer saw himself solely as a victim of injustice. Instead, he embraced his role as someone who could spark change. And for Linda, it was a chance to rewrite her narrative, not as someone defined by her mistakes, but as someone determined to make amends and grow. Though scars remained from that difficult day, the community emerged stronger, bound by shared experiences and a collective desire to do better. In the end, what started as a painful chapter became a story of redemption, resilience, and hope, a testament to the power of accountability and the enduring possibility of change.